Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. I was going to weigh in on the whole issue that's come to light over the last week or so with Angelina Jolie and the double mastectomy, even though she didn't actually have cancer, despite having a very high risk of it because of the genetics. I decided I wasn't going to talk about it, but then I saw this other article, a different topic, but I kind of saw a relationship between the two. And that really brought up a lot of things in my mind which I wanted to go over, because it seems to be that there's a ongoing and increasing disrespect or suppression of just femininity in our culture at this time on our planet. And there's a lot of people that are, suppressing it, trying to brush it off in this way that is really covert, and I don't know if there's an intentional agenda behind it or not. That's kind of conspiratorial. However, we can see it as a fundamentally unhealthy mental, almost like program that a lot of people are operating out of, because it's based on an ideology and it's causing things to come out and occur, and a big one being this mainstream medical practice of double mastectomies, or even most of the slash burn poison techniques of modern medicine could probably get grouped in along with this. However, in particular with women, that's an area of the body that obviously has a large amount of femininity associated with it, but also has a big impact on a woman's obviously ability to nourish children after she's had them. But there's also a lot of hormonal activity that's tied in with the breast tissue. And it's not just something that you can, throw away and not have health consequences from, even though people think of it just as like, fat with skin that's just hanging off the body essentially. It's a lot more complex than that. Everything in our body's there for a purpose. We know that. And so my original reason not to talk about it was because I didn't want to preach to the choir, but I can feel confident enough in all of you guys watching me here that you have the wherewithal to understand why it is fundamentally a silly idea to do these almost like acute type approaches to sustainability in terms of health. So the argument being that if you have a high risk of something, you chop it off so that that part of your body doesn't get sick or grow cancer or whatever. But the only thing I'll say on the topic before I branch off into what I really wanted to talk about to a larger degree is that if you have a risk for something and they've determined this risk based on other people, that determination is based on the average population. So if the average person's out there consuming processed food, being exposed to all manner of various types of radiation, slathering on all sorts of chemical products, personal care products, barely doing anything remotely good in terms of actual legitimate health practices of any type, except maybe a little bit of exercise and, thinking they're eating healthy, whatever that might be to them, whatever mainstream model that fits within. So essentially, when you look at populations like that and you see, okay, so these people with this genetic abnormality, which we can trace and see in other people, and in this big group we see, 87% increased risk of breast cancer in those who have it, then we can tell that person that they have that risk. Well, it does not work like that, because lifestyle is number one over genetics in this case. And this is really where I'm going to branch off here, because there's this whole nature versus nurture idea. And so nurture being what our environment shapes us to be. So you eat organic food, you're going to be fundamentally healthier than someone eating non-organic food. And that's going to affect your genetic expression. So if you have the abnormal gene that gives you a higher risk of breast cancer, and you're doing all the same things that all those other people out there that had the breast cancer occur at the 87% rate, you're probably going to have an 87% rate of getting cancer. Should we look at a population that has an impeccably, might I use the word clean, and by clean I mean organic, not filled with all sorts of abnormal type foods, whole foods, and also very conscientious lifestyle, we might see a drastically lower rate of cancer in those people that have that particular gene, because lifestyle is extremely implicit with disease in terms of shaping our genetic expression. Now the other side to it is nature. So there's a lot of things we do which don't have a change depending on what it is we're doing in our environment. A lot of these things are hereditary, like, skin color. You see, I'm Caucasian. It's very unlikely if my parents suddenly got a lot of sun right before I was conceived that I would be born black. That happens over many, 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 many generations over prolonged exposure to the sunlight, and there's these changes that gradually happen over time if we're talking about that specific change. And the ways that human pedigrees, or even if we look to the animal kingdom, like use dogs for example, you have the gray wolf and it permutates down to these other dog breeds. Depending on how fast the cycles turn over, there's a certain speed at which an animal can adapt, and it sometimes adapts faster than others depending on how much stress and how much pressure there is on that animal to adapt. But it's also a matter of, this takes time. It's not a one generational thing in almost all cases. So this brings me to the other big point which got me being interested in sharing this information today. And that was an article which I'll link to below. It'll be the first article linked below. I don't really need to give links to the whole Angelina Jolie thing because there's tons of information out that. I just recommend looking at naturalnews.com and searching and looking at the Angelina Jolie information there, because that had a lot of good coverage on that, and I agree with most of the opinions there on that particular story. But this is a story on the daughter of a famous author who's a prominent feminist, Alice Walker. There's a movie based on one of her biggest selling books, The Color Purple. I haven't read it, I haven't seen the movie. Maybe I will after this, I'll check it out. So I don't know a ton about her premise, except for what was covered in this article, which was largely about motherhood and how the mother was very anti-mothering and had this idea that being a mother or having children was in and of itself devaluing to women, and put them into a slave type role that they couldn't get out of and they'd be trapped in. And then the daughter, who was disowned by her mother, unfortunately, actually I got quite sad reading this. It was very unfortunate to read, and it made me so grateful. Just, so soon after Mother's Day, which we celebrated our mothers. Hopefully you had a chance to do that depending on your own familial situation. And seeing my own mother, who's very passionate about feminism, has a career that is quite tied into feminist values, having a very different view, in that I was very grateful that I was fortunate enough to have been born into a family that they had these views, yet they didn't have them in that way, and that really once again shows me that there's a lot of different possibilities of views within the whole feminist paradigm and ideology. But in this particular case, we're seeing someone who just flat out is going against what is naturally given to her. I mean, she at some point made the choice to have a kid because she had this daughter, and if she was so against it, why, you might ask, why did she have it in the first place? Because it's putting her in that unfortunate role. But for whatever reason, she had a kid, and later on down the road, she's disowning this person, especially when her daughter chose to have a child. And that was just the straw that, she even wrote her out of her will, this prominent author who has tons of money, many properties and things all over the world. And, she's kicking her daughter out of her life because she sees reproduction as this burden on women. So that really got me thinking and comparing it almost to this. And I see these as two different extremes of these paradigms, and it's that nature versus nurture. So on one hand, you have the medical paradigm, which sees things purely from the nature point of view, where, genetics are everything. There is no influence of lifestyle on health. We can't alter it. And then you have the other extreme, which is, at least a lot of ideas in feminism, I find, tend to be very dominant on nurture. They think everything can be solved by the way people are brought up. And I've even had this discussion many times, and it blows my mind that, especially when it comes to things like gender, and these people talk about, boys and girls are pretty much the same, except, it's the way they're brought up that makes them different. It's like, well, testosterone is 10 times, even up to 20 times higher in boys, and there's an extreme amount of behavioral differences that testosterone causes into whomever it's injected into. And then you look at progesterone and the estrogens and the effects that has on the body. And all you have to do is look at people on hormone replacement therapy and see the vast changes that they go through from, having these things put into their body. So, nature versus nurture. And we're seeing the two extremes of it where, there's the nurture thinking that, the woman wants to feel empowered and like she can make tons of money and just be this powerful figure like she might see in a man, but she feels like she has to give up her own body's natural processes in an attempt to attain that. And in the process, she cuts herself off from, her heart, her family. And if we were going to go even deeper into it, and I've covered this in past videos, when a woman makes the choice to not have any kids whatsoever, she actually increases her risk for breast cancer. So the process of becoming pregnant, bearing a child for the full term of labor, and even nursing and raising a child actually increases quite drastically progesterone levels in a woman. So let's be frank and honest about evolution. Women were barefoot and pregnant for many, many, many generations, going way, way back till, before we were even human. Yes, there'd be a point where that would stop, but having, through childbearing years, several kids actually ensures elevated progesterone levels for longer periods of time, which offsets and kills off cancer cells in the body. And it's been found that women who have had children have much lower levels of depression later in life. They have a whole host of reduced risk for a whole bunch of diseases. I'm not saying all women should be barefoot and pregnant. I'm saying that these hormones that are elevated during childbearing years, if you are with child frequently, are important to get in if you're not choosing to have lots of kids. So, that's something to keep in mind if you are doing the path of no or very few kids. You'd want to look at supplementing with various types of progesterone, either promoting foods or progesterone cream. I'm going to link to a video here which I did in the not too distant past, within the last year, on various herbs, foods, and approaches you can use for better overall hormonal health as a woman. So that really brought it home to me that the extremes of anything are never good. You have the nurture versus nature. We have to kind of recognize that both of those paradigms shape us as humans, and as we move into the world and grow up, we have to be aware of our genetic history, of course. If we have a higher risk of certain things, you want to tailor it. Redheads with very pale skin need to be conscientious about how much sun they get. Even though it's been said many times that getting a lot of sunlight on your skin is great for vitamin D, the paler you are, the more conscientious you have to be with that exposure, especially when you have the lighter eye color. That indicates certain things about how your skin will react with the sun. And even though there's tons of toxic sunscreens out there that, in my opinion, are, and that's based on facts that I've researched in past videos, those are worse than getting excess sun exposure in and of itself. However, reduce your risk of skin cancer by not getting too much sun if you're within those ethnic groups. So that's an example of nature dictating how we should approach the real world and be aware of the facts of what our genetics set us up for. However, nurture is that element of how can we work with our environment and our lifestyle to either shift our genes away from certain problems, so that's like defective genes that set us up for various illnesses that we might have inherited. Could have been what Angelina Jolie did had she just chosen to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and work with Brad Pitt on that and get knocked out on a regular basis over her childbearing years, not put too much emphasis on her movie career. I'm just kidding, guys. She could have just simply used progesterone cream on a more regular basis or done other types of approaches to facilitate healthier hormone levels that would have prevented that risk of cancer that would have been so elevated. Had she continued living a very conventional lifestyle in terms of diet and things like that. So whether it's an extreme dietary ideology, an extreme exercise program or ideology, or in this case, medical idea or ideology, what we always find is that the middle ground is usually somewhere in there. That is where it falls to be the best option if we're actually looking for sustainability and health and the actual solution to our problem. So it's something that I see as if we're going to go back to the idea of feminism here, something that's very prevalent within the ideas that are pushed forward by a lot of these groups. So first I'll emphasize the positive. Everyone should have the options to do whatever it is they want with their life. Have all workplaces be accommodating to women in all positions. Equal pay, equal rights, equal opportunity in all cases. And that's really important because there's a war on femininity, in my opinion, where things like motherhood, bearing children, these more nurturing type jobs are seen as weak. And it's even in the feminist language. You read that article where this woman is really talking down the role that her daughter has chosen to take on. And her daughter feels wonderful doing it. Whereas you have this bitter, wizened old woman who's really just doesn't sound like a pleasant person to be around. And you can really see that if something's bringing someone joy, it's not going to be inherently disempowering, is it? And I think that's the big place in women's health where, part of that whole ideology has caused this whole medical paradigm to start approaching things in such a barbaric way, where you have the slicing off of breast tissue for preventative reasons. You look at other areas of women's health and it is quite a ways behind certain things that male health have developed up to. Essentially, yes, we need to really look at things from the naturalistic perspective, which is like, if this is what our body does and this is who we are and what we've been born into, let's kind of look at it and accept it, as opposed to trying to change it in this weird, obtuse way that, if we're looking at either of these two paradigms, the extremes, they don't seem that healthy. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. Like, favorite, or share the video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.